Ray, his pronouns are he, him, is a fourth-year undergraduate student studying classics at the University of Oxford. And his paper today is entitled The Christian Coal Society, 3 Years On. As the secretary at its foundation and subsequently president, Ray has worked with the Christian Coal Society for the past 3 years. Founded in 2019, the aims of the society are to create a nurturing and supportive community for classicists of color, and to work towards the decolonization of classics and advocate for critical perspectives, especially from scholars of color. So we welcome you, Ray Cheung.
Hi, everyone. Let me just get my presentation. Can everyone see that?
Yes, we can. I can, at least.
So I'll start. Hi, everyone. Yeah, like I've been introduced, my name is Ray. I'm a fourth-year undergraduate, and until recently, I was the president of the Christian Coal Society. It's an honor to be speaking to you today. Before I start, I would like to thank the other speakers for their presentations, and Joe and Hannah especially for organizing the conference. It's immensely encouraging to see so many other people passionate about and striving towards equity in classics. I don't have anything particularly academic to say, but over the next 25 minutes or so, I hope to share my experiences working with the Christian Coal Society and perhaps some insights from what I've learned. So first of all, it's only right to introduce our namesake, who was the first Black person to graduate from the University of Oxford. Christian Frederick Cole was born in Sierra Leone in 1851 or 1852. His BA honours degree was conferred on Thursday, 14th of December, 1876. He returned to Sierra Leone in 1880 and then moved to London in 1881, where he continued with his legal studies. He was called to the English bar in 1883. However, he found it difficult to find work in London, and in 1885, he moved to the island of Zanzibar, now part of Tanzania. He died there from smallpox on the 7th of December, 1885, at the age of 33. This plaque was put up by University College, Oxford, and was unveiled on Logic Lane on the 14th of October, 2017. This shows the size of the plaque. The most well-known images of Cole are caricatures, so I've not included any here. However, this newspaper clipping, which was dug up from an archive by our former senior member, indicates that the photograph of Cole was taken. So all that remains to be done is to find it. It also gives us an indication of how he was treated. Not that it's hard to imagine how a Black man in Oxford in the 1870s would have been treated and what he would have had to endure. It reads, "During the past week, we have noticed the familiar face of the author of Reflections on the Zulu War and other political works, which have lately created some sensation in our midst. The genial writer has evidently come up to bask in the sunshine of his notoriety and has even been shot at Shrimpton's to give his admirers the privilege of purchasing his photo. We received a threatening letter from him last week, stating that it was his intention and determination to criticize as severely and witheringly as possible our critique on his publications. Our reviewers thought it advisable to spend most of his time away from his room lately, not being quite sure as to the method that would be employed by a native of Western Africa in severely and witheringly criticizing our recent notice. We are indebted to Christian Cole and the other people of color who paved the way for not only the foundation of the Christian Coal Society, but also for individual students at Oxford." So now on to the society. The Christian Coal Society was founded in October 2019. It was the brainchild of Kasim Ali, the former outreach officer of the Oxford Classics faculty, and was brought into existence by Andy Marsh, my predecessor who has now graduated, and I as the society's first secretary. This was at the beginning of my second year, and the society has since grown significantly. Our two aims are as follows. Firstly, we want to create a nurturing and supportive community for classicists of colour, specifically at the University of Oxford, but more broadly where possible. Secondly, we work towards the decolonisation of classics and advocate for critical perspectives, especially from scholars of colour. I'm now going to talk about each of these in detail. So these are pictures from an event that we held fairly recently. These kinds of events don't involve any kind of intellectual engagement unless it happens to occur naturally. But we found that the development of community bonds is extremely important and something that is very hard to quantify. Because of the pandemic circumstances, we struggled a great deal with this aim and have only started to make substantial progress with this over the course of this year. However, I have personally seen and felt the tremendous impact of it. The feeling of solidarity is one that's hard to put into words, but it's extremely comforting to enter a familiar space filled with people who have similar experiences within a wider environment which is dominated by white voices and because of this is often hostile. Something that I saw hosted by the London Classics of Colour, which I thought was really excellent, was an online session with two tenured academics of colour. It was more social than academic, and students were given the opportunity to talk to scholars of colour to learn about their experiences and to gain insights into what a career in academia could look like for them specifically. It was an inspiring experience for me personally, as I don't know many academics of colour, never mind classicists of colour specifically. Contrary to the opinions of some, I believe that it's crucial for young people of colour to get to see people like them in senior positions. Rationally, it isn't hard to understand that classics professors who aren't white exist as a concept, but it's another thing entirely to get to speak to and interact with the people themselves and to receive encouragement from them. This is something that I hope the Christian Cole Society will get to do in the future. As mentioned earlier, the other half of our work has an academic focus. We've hosted several seminar series, such as Re-injecting Colour into Classics and Critical Classics. We're extremely grateful to our speakers, especially those who volunteered their time when the society had no funds and was unable to remunerate them. Some of them even traveled to Oxford. Because of the pandemic circumstances, only the first of these was actually in person back in 2019, with a reading group shortly before lockdown in 2020. But one advantage of this is that some of the talks were recorded and uploaded to our YouTube channel. If you search the Christian Cole Society, you can find them there. To give you an idea of exactly what kind of talks we host, I'm just going to talk about the Classics Reconnected series, which we hosted in 2021. The 4 lectures were Lessons from Rome, Some Chinese Perspectives in the Early 20th Century by Professor Jinyu Liu, Re-envisioning the Classics Through African Diasporic Art, Alison Sarr by Sierra Jones, There Be Monsters, Race and Gender in the Reception of Siren Myth by Dr. Han Tran, and Beyond Mystical Reveries, Cultural Eclecticism and Literary Ambition in Greco-Egyptian Alchemy by Dr. Fabiana Lopez de Silveira. The focus of the series was on reconnection, to suggest that the field of classics had the potential to be something broad and diverse and wide-reaching, but has been directed down a narrow and restricted path. Some of the issues that we wanted to tackle here were geographical diversity. So we have Near Eastern Greek texts here, but also ranging further to the reception of Greco-Roman antiquity in China, challenging white supremacy and coloniality, which is perhaps best seen in the engagement with classical art and mythology in depictions of slavery, and interdisciplinarity, which is admittedly more of an Oxford problem than one of the field as a whole, as far as I can tell. We are proud of what was achieved in this series and grateful to our speakers for sharing their work. But after the series, we face a conundrum. How do we engage the Oxford undergraduate student body? The series was well received, and our talks that year had enjoyed success internationally, primarily in the US, because they were held online. However, while attendance in Oxford was not totally insignificant, the few undergraduates who attended were usually people of colour who are already associated with society. Let me make it clear that I'm not blaming the students themselves. If you have 16 books of the Iliad to read in Greek, I can understand why you wouldn't want to spend an hour of your free time attending an off-curriculum classics lecture. The issue here is the phrase off-curriculum. At Oxford, there is little to no space for discussions of topics that aren't within the traditional bounds of classics, understood as Greco-Roman antiquity. This is definitely a point of contention, but I stand by my opinion, which is based on what I've seen classics has the potential to be. I'm speaking specifically about my own experience of the classics course at Oxford, as there are a number of other courses such as classical archaeology and ancient history, or ancient and modern history, but I imagine that the overall approach is similar. For those who are not familiar with the Oxford Classics curriculum, it's usually period-based. Of around 80 finals papers, the only papers that deviate from this scheme, as far as I know, are one paper on Greek and Roman religions, one on sexuality and gender, and a reception paper titled The Reception of Classical Literature in Poetry in English since 1900. All papers fall under the subfaculties of Languages and Literature, Ancient History, Philosophy, Arts and Archaeology, or Philology. I'm not criticizing the system as a whole, as it has its pros and cons, but it does make it harder to make space for things such as an examination of concepts like race across the ancient world, or studies which reckon with the colonial uses of classics. Moreover, the structure is extremely rigid. I was informed that one of the most recently introduced papers on the Achaemenid Empire required a great deal of discussion and persuasion before it was admitted to the syllabus. Given that there is no space allotted to these issues, we were faced with a dilemma. Do we continue to platform the work of scholars of color, which traditionally lies on the fringes of classics, or do we meet students where they are and encourage attendance in that way? By this, I mean presenting decolonial or critical approaches to material which was already on the syllabus. We decided to try it, but we encountered two primary issues. Firstly, the pool of classicists who work on, for example, the Aeneid, who are people of color, whose work is specifically decolonial or critical, who are willing and have the time to speak to an undergraduate audience, who are happy to be recorded, and because we wanted to hold the talks in person who are in the UK, is microscopic. We originally envisioned holding 8 lectures on a fortnightly basis, but ended up organizing 4 and holding only 3 because one speaker caught COVID. Looking back, I suppose it was ambitious to imagine that we could hold 8 of these talks, but I do think that it goes to show above all how few people of color work in classics, especially in the UK. Secondly, attendance was not markedly higher. Although I deliberately advertised these talks as relating to mods, mods are the exams that all second-year classicists have to sit, there were still relatively few undergraduate classicists who attended them. The fundamental takeaway here is that curriculum change needs to happen in order for progress to be made. It doesn't really matter how many diverse approaches we offer if these aren't systematically integrated into the education that is offered by institutions and therefore given consequence. This leads nicely on to the next part of my talk, which is on the issue of institutional change and our experience of working with an institution. Perhaps in an institution would be more appropriate. Before I get into the details, I want to make our position very clear. The Christian Coal Society is a student-run society. As a classics society, we are associated with the classics faculty. And from the beginning of 2021, we began to receive £350 of funding per term from the faculty. We are very grateful for this funding, and we would not be able to do much of what we do without the faculty's financial support. We are not part of the faculty, and they have had no say in our activities so far. I would like to say that they cannot, but I don't know if this is true. Just one more note. In the process of writing the section on interactions with the faculty, I had to think very carefully about what I could and could not say. Where content is controversial or difficult, the decision I reached was not to speak. So far, I've mentioned the curriculum, but not any curriculum changes. There are currently some reforms taking place with regard to the structure of honour moderations, which are the exams I mentioned just now. But I'm not going to say anything about these, in part because I haven't read about them in enough detail to offer a nuanced opinion, although what I've seen so far does not seem pertinent to this talk. Categorically, there has never been any conversation between the Christian Coal Society and the Oxford Classics faculty on the issue of curriculum change. In fact, although I've had meetings with members of the faculty numerous times, only once or twice was this actually in my capacity as president of the Christian Core Society. And on one of these occasions, there would have been a discussion about us without any of our members present to represent us. I want to make it very clear that the Christian Core Society is not a faculty measure. I don't want our name to be thrown around in the name of equality, diversity, and inclusivity. There seems to be a fundamental misunderstanding in anti-racist action, which I don't believe is unique to Oxford. By no means do I claim to have the answers, but I do know this. The solution must come from the inside out, not the outside in. The Christian Core Society cannot be used to advertise your diverse research culture when the vast majority of our speakers are not from Oxford. Posting pictures of classicists of colour around the faculty will have no effect, except to assuage the feelings of those inside the faculty. This is something we were approached to do, but declined. In fact, it makes me angry to think that the pictures I've included as part of this talk could be misused towards that end. I recently had a passing conversation with someone involved in faculty outreach. They told me that they were working on the faculty introduction videos, which include staff and students. And they said to me, "Do you know what's wrong with the videos? Every single person is white. I'm about to try and fix that before they go out." I'm personally fond of this person, and they are very well intentioned, but even they have missed the point here. The dominance of white people in the front-facing videos is the least of our problems. This brings me specifically on the issue of outreach. We have never engaged in outreach, and this is partially because the committee has always been overworked and spread extremely thin. We were, in fact, quite recently invited to collaborate with faculty outreach. It was quite a vague invitation, so no details were discussed. However, the other committee members and I reached the conclusion that we would personally feel uncomfortable doing outreach work, specifically in the narrower sense of telling students to apply to Oxford. It would feel disingenuous to tell students of colour that they would thrive and be happy at Oxford when we aren't certain about this is the case. We believe that access is about more than entrance and should include supporting the underrepresented students whose marginalization continues throughout higher education. It does not miraculously end at the point of admission. Of course, the Christian Core Society supports outreach efforts as a whole and is an incredibly important part of making higher education more equitable. However, we believe that the manner of its execution has to be well thought out and comprehensive. It has to be about equity as a principle, not as an aesthetic. I'm now going to give some more general thoughts on our position within the broader aim of equity within classics. Firstly, if I may speak hyperbolically, we have no idea what we're doing. Although the initiative was begun by a past outreach officer, as mentioned, everything that we've done has been imagined, planned, and carried out by us. This is not a boast, it's more a statement of precarity. Before the start of each term, there are a series of very stressful messages on a very stressed group chat about what events we want to host in the coming weeks, and then what we can feasibly manage alongside our degrees. If those messages aren't exchanged, nothing happens. Moreover, every initiative that we start feels like it could be the last, even though it's usually the first time that any of us has attempted anything like it. It feels like if we mess up, they finally get to say, well, we gave them a chance and look how it went. Secondly, the society's position is a difficult one. As mentioned, we receive funding from the faculty, and it renders our position within the institution both unclear and quite uncomfortable. As the very famous quote from Audre Lorde goes, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." I'm quite certain that we're doing a good thing, but I don't know what the role of the Christian Core Society should be in the future. And it will be something for future presidents to think about, not me, though I have often wondered what the role of the society could be if there were no longer things that we had to do. Thirdly, and this is quite important, we are people of colour, not experts in educational equity. Although we are marginalised and our experiences are very different to those of our white peers, meaning we can offer our lived experiences as I'm doing now, The fact of our ethnicities does not bestow us with some kind of superior knowledge about what should be done. Furthermore, we are in the process of receiving exactly the education that we are critiquing. Personally, I have studied late Republican to early Imperial Latin poetry to death. But when it comes to the actual work of decolonizing classics, I'm woefully under-equipped. I want to shout out Chella Ward, who has just spoken, and Ria Duxbury for their work on the Worcester College decolonization course. It's an extremely well thought out program and an excellent example of how we can bridge the knowledge gap to go from students fighting for a decolonized education to students receiving a more decolonized education. Unfortunately, only the lecture series is open to the public, I believe, but it is a truly exceptional effort regardless. What follows might be the most difficult parts of this talk that I have to deliver, but I have two main points to make. Firstly, well-wishing white people have never been enough. By this, I'm referring specifically to people who applaud us but never take action. Many tutors have said that we provide an interesting perspective or a different way of looking at things, and some senior tutors have even expressed their support to me in private. This is not enough. What we, broadly defined, are working towards is a total rehaul of the status quo. This cannot be achieved by a passive majority. We do not need quiet support. We need you to vote for change on the faculty board. So at Oxford, the faculty board is composed of a small group of the most senior, permanently employed scholars. Consistently, the overwhelming majority of these scholars are white, if not all of them, and most are male as well. The faculty board is where your good intentions can become tangible reality. Unfortunately, for those who are not on the board, it often feels remote and communication is difficult. This is why the support of those who do have access to this body is so crucial. Secondly, if you take anything away from this talk, we must protect students of color. Don't get me wrong, I'm extremely grateful to have had the opportunity to work with the Christian Cole Society, and I'm sure that other committee members share this sentiment. However, it should not be a risk. The first question that someone asks before they run for a committee role should not be whether it will affect their standing with their tutors and with the faculty, or whether they will be victimized for their views. Oxford perhaps stands out as an unusual environment in that the boundaries between staff and students are blurred. The proximity of a small group tutorial system results in closer personal relationships with tutors and means that navigating said relationships can be difficult. It's hard enough to attend a lecture of a professor whose behavior has been unacceptable. It's agonizing to sit down directly in front of them and engage closely in tutorial discussion. I have witnessed and experienced firsthand the kind of harm, emotional harm, long-term mental health issues, the feeling that you are not safe, that institutional change can entail for students of color who engage in activism, and simultaneously, the lack of support for these students. Classics has lost some of the people whom I consider not only academically and intellectually outstanding, but good and kind people who want to affect change for the better. I cannot impress upon you enough that the situation needs to be fixed, and ultimately, it is not students of color who have the power to do this. I want to end on a high note, so here are some recent wins. When I was at the Freshers' Fair on behalf of the Christian Cole Society at the beginning of this year, naturally I had to explain who we were every 2 minutes or so. One of the highlights of that day was that when a PhD student approached, she interrupted my spiel and said that she knew who we were, that she'd been looking for us, and that her professor in China had actually recommended that she come and find us. Another student visiting from the US approached me at the end of last term to thank the society for creating such a welcoming space for people of color, specifically within the field of classics. It's amazing to think that now classics of color who are coming to Oxford for the first time can find solidarity and community. Co-hosting events for the London Classics of Color and establishing a bond with them has been a wonderful experience. It's been difficult to work on the 2 or 3 year cycle of undergraduate study and committee turnover, and I hope that this connection will continue to be fruitful for both societies. There is definitely power in numbers. I'm also aware of a group with similar aims at Cambridge, And though it's not a society, I hope that connections can be fostered with them too. I'm aware that these are all elite institutions, but unfortunately, currently these are the only only UK universities where such societies exist, as far as I'm aware. As mentioned, my time with the Christian Coal Society has come to an end because I'm sitting my final exams next week. This has been the first term that I've not been personally involved in society, so it's actually quite a sad time. However, I'm confident that the society will continue to thrive. The committee has expanded from 3 people to 6, and I'm so excited to see what they will get up to. Under the leadership of the new president, Sophie Clark, I know that they will not only continue the work of the past 3 years, but go on to do even greater things, and I will be watching proudly. Thank you very much for listening.